All right, Rabbosai, good morning. Let us start by thanking our sponsors. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Adar, Paul and Kathy Pollack, for dedicating all of the Shiurim and Drushos this month in memory of Paul's grandparents, Dina Bas Pesach and Zechariah ben Zechariah. To thank our Day of Learning sponsor, the very beautiful the Pomerantz family, in honor of the birthday of their patriarch, Joel Pomerantz in Philadelphia. Happy birthday, Admeir Esem Shalom Tovos, by his loving and devoted family. Truly beautiful. And we'll say it's very exciting that Parak of Arvei Pesachim has been dedicated by Maishi and Chavi Abramson in the Zechus of a Refuah Shlema for a little boy in our community, Daniel Meir Ben Chana. We hope that in merit of our Talmud Torah, he together with Kol Cholei Yisrael will have a complete and enduring Refuah. Thank the Abramsons very much for that special sponsorship as well. So with that, let us begin. So today's daf is Tzadik Tes. We are picking up in Meretz Hashem at the top of Tzadik Tes. We got all the way, we're starting at the bottom of Tzadik Chesed Beis. Yesterday, in the hours after Shabbos, as I think I went about 4 minutes overtime after Shabbos, and everyone knows, you could be late for a lot of things in life. The one thing you cannot be late for on a communal level is Ma'ariv on Matzei Shabbos, right? Mamish, every single person has the most emergent things to do on Matzei Shabbos. Okay, I apologize for that. Let's pick up from the Gemara. So today's daf is Tzadik Tes 99. We are picking up on Tzadik Chesed Beis 98 to be at the Gemara. Tan Rabbanan, Amr Lahen, Lo Amru Lo, Ochel Min Arishon, Lo Amr Lahen V'Lo Amru Lo. Einon achra in ze'alzeh. So we'll say the Gemara does something very interesting. Essentially what the Gemara does is condenses the first couple of cases really into two general principles. Principle number one is that when the two groups speak to each other, remember again, we had a variety of different cases. Remember from yesterday? From yesterday we had a Chabura lost its carbon Pesach. Reuven, one of the members of the Chabura, goes out to search for the Chabura's carbon Pesach. So there were two categories of cases. Case number one is where, let's say, Reuven said to the Chabura, I'm going out to find, if I'm late, shecht on my behalf, or the Chabura says to Reuven, if you find it shecht on our behalf, they communicate. Now, interestingly enough, that's where the confusion comes up. Well, again, if we know who found the carbon and who shechted first, that's one case. If there's ambiguity, we're not sure who shechted first, that's where you usually end up with a situation where what? Someone's not eating carbon Pesach. Remember again, as we pointed out, in most of the cases that the Mishnah mentioned, everybody's Yotzei carbon Pesach, but usually when there's confusion, someone's not going to get to eat carbon Pesach. Versus the case where the Chabur loses the Pesach, Reuven goes out to find the carbon, but no one communicates with each other. So Reuven doesn't communicate with the Chabur doesn't communicate to Reuven. So the Gemara says something amazing. Top of Tzadik Tes. Mikan Amru Chachamim. From here, and remember again, before we get to it, and remember what happens in that case where no one communicates with each other? The Gemara says, Einon Achra in Zalza. Essentially, at that point, everyone does their own thing. To which the Gemara says something amazing. Tzadik Tes Amadalef. Mikan Amru Chachamim. From here, the Chacham said, Rabbosai, get ready for this. Yafeh shtika lachachamim kal v'chomer letipshim. How good silence is for the wise, all the more so for the fools. Or Rabbosai, what does this mean? Because here's what's amazing. When they communicate with each other, that when they talk, that's when they get themselves into trouble. Right? That's where there's ambiguity. So what do? Who eats the Pesach? Who doesn't eat the Pesach? Who shechted first? Who didn't shecht first? Versus when they say nothing to each other, what ends up happening? Reuven, you do your thing. Chabur does their thing. I just want to point. So the Gemara quotes a pasuk. Shneimar Evel Machrish Chacham Yechashev. The Gemara quotes the pasuk from Mishlei that ultimately, when the fool is silent, he could even be looked at as a wise man. We'll say a very profound Gemara because, in general, when dealing with group dynamics, communication is usually the best thing, right? Usually, again, when it comes to relationships, so again, non-communication leads to the fundamental erosion of a relationship. But what the Gemara is pointing out is that sometimes communication can be detrimental. And I'll say this is an incredible yesod. So sometimes communication is of utmost necessary for group dynamics, but sometimes the Gemara is telling us silence is the best thing. And we know this, even in relationships. There are certain things that are good to talk out, but then there are other things that are difficult topics that are not going to have resolution. And so to beat a dead horse and to keep talking about things that we're just not going to find the common ground on, and to keep talking about things that are just a source of contention with no solution in mind, Shtika is the best approach. So again, the Gemara says, Yaf shtika lachachamim, kal v'chomer l'tibshim. Silence is good for the wise. Alachas kama v'kama for the foolish. Beautiful. Says the Gemara, Shnaim shenis arbu pischeihen. So we'll say, so remember again, we then had the very interesting case as follows. This was the last case in the Mishnah, and I know that I did this pretty quickly. Somebody was already saying V'lurachum as I was reading this last part of the Mishnah. So we'll say, so remember, this is the case. Reuven and Shimon each had a Karban Pesach. And remember again, there was no other Chabura besides them. Reuven had his Karban, Shimon had his Karban. They got their Karbanos mixed up. So let's remember again what the Mishnah said. What do you do in that case? So they each go out to the Shuk. Reuven finds, we'll call him, Reuven finds A, gets another guy, call him A. Shimon finds another guy, calls him B. And then we'll say, what ends up happening? Essentially, what they end up doing is they end up swapping Chabura members. And therefore, again, each Reuven and Shimon then each take an animal. And effectively, what they each say is like this. Reuven says, listen, so now Reuven chose A originally, Shimon chose B. Now Reuven takes B, Shimon takes A. Reuven and B stand there, and Reuven takes an animal. Reuven says like this, if the animal that I just took was the one which was originally mine, then what? Then B, you're leaving Shimon's Chabura coming to me. But if it turns out that the animal that I took really belonged to Shimon, then B, I'm leaving my Chabura and I'm coming to, so to speak, leaving my Chabura and I'm coming to you. And Shimon does the same process. So says the Gemara, what do you see from here? Rabbi Yehuda. Our Mishnah clearly does not reflect the view of Rabbi Yehuda. Why not? Disanyo, vim yimat habayis miyos miseh. So we'll say the pasuk says that if you don't have enough people in your home to go ahead and partake of the sheep, to partake of the carbon, so that's what the Torah says, that you should get together with your neighbor, get together with others. However, Rabbi Yehuda says, well, we'll see, Obilvad she'echad mibnei chabura kayim div Rabbi Yehuda. And we'll see, interestingly enough, Rabbi Yehuda holds that halacha l'maisa, you could change around chaburas all you want, but there must always be an original member of the chabura present. Look at Rashi for just a moment. Look at Rabbi Yehuda. Deboi she'echad mibnei chabura harishonim kayim alav. So we'll say this is incredibly important. Rabbi Yehuda says you could have as much movement in a chabura as you want, but there must always be an original member of the chabura present as part of that carbon. Now it gets more interesting. Take a look at Rashi. He goes on. He says, "Devaya echem nechabura rishon kayim alav daha vade osim shnayim sheviyim min hashuk ina chashub nechabura hoyu v'lo hayu b'shas liki chasan." So we'll say Rashi gives an incredible qualification. Not only does Rabbi Yehuda hold that halacha l'maisa, you have to have an original member of the chabura, but I will say, when is the original chabura, so to speak, concretized? When is that chabura created? Not b'shas shchita, b'shas lekicha, at the time that the animal is purchased. The original chevra is solidified at the time of the purchase of the animal. So we'll say, so now watch this. According to Rabbi Yehuda, so the Gemara is suggesting that our Mishnah clearly does not reflect the view of Rabbi Yehuda. According to Rabbi Yehuda, we'll say, what can you have? You could end up having a Karban Pesach that does not have original members part of it. Because we'll say, remember again, in the case of the Shnaim, of the two people who get their Karbanos mixed up, there's only two original members. Who are the two original members? Reuven and Shimon. Right now, Reuven and Shimon are going out to the Shuk, and they're going ahead, and they're getting two new guys. But Bepashtos, those guys, according to Rabbi Yehuda, are not members of the original Chabura. So therefore, you could end up having a situation. Let's play this out. So remember again, Reuven goes out and gets A, Shimon goes out and gets B. Then they swap. Reuven takes B as his Chabura, Shimon takes A. It's possible then that the carbon that Reuven ends up eating is a carbon that ultimately, again, it was quote-unquote B's carbon, but B himself wasn't even an original member of a chabura. So all the Gemara is just suggesting is that clearly the Mishnah does not reflect the view of Rabbi Yehuda. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yossi, I'm sorry. I just have to read the rest of the line. Rabbi Yossi Omer, Obevat shlo yanichu es ha-pesach kimoshehu. Rabbi Yossi, on the other hand, holds like this. You don't have to have an original member of the chabura. Just the restriction is, you can never have an ownerless Karban Pesach. So you have to make sure that the Karban Pesach is never without owners. So we'll say, for example, I'll give you a good nafkamina case. Let's say you have Chabura A, just a regular case. Chabura A, they buy a Karban Pesach together. Then they decide, you know what? They found the more beautiful sheep. They want to go to a different animal. So now they identify Chabura B is willing to take ownership of the animal. So according to Rabbi Yossi, for example, you can't have a situation where A withdraws and then B takes the carbon, because that would leave the animal without ownership. What you can do is what? You can have B join, or at least some of B join, and then A could withdraw. So like this, so we'll say the nafkamina is, according to Rabbi Yossi, the animal can never be without owners. But if the animal ends up with different ownership, in other words, none of the original ownership remains, that's okay. So this is the machlokes Rabbi Yossi. All the Gemara is suggesting is it's clear the Mishnah does not reflect the view of Rabbi Yehuda, because according to Rabbi Yehuda, the solution mentioned in the Mishnah should not work. Because according to Rabbi Yehuda, you can end up leaving the Korban Pesach without original Pesach ownership. To which the Gemara says, Am Rabbi Yochanan, no, not necessarily. Afilu Teim Rabbi Yehuda, the Mishnah could even reflect the view of Rabbi Yehuda. Why? Keva dam Rabbi Yehuda, ein shochten esa Pesach al hayochid, meikara le'emnuye achrina bahadei koi, uke'echad mimnei chabura dami. Shabbos said, this is very interesting. There's another sheet of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda holds that halacha l'maisa, you can't shecht a carbon Pesach for an individual. You can't do it. We learned this before, actually. You can't go ahead and shecht a carbon Pesach for an individual. There must be a chabura. So therefore, we'll say like this. When Reuven owns the Pesach by himself, that's not a chabura according to Rabbi Yehuda. Therefore, by definition, that chabura requires the addition of another person. Therefore, when Reuven goes out to the shuk, and Shimon does the same thing, goes out to the shuk, those are considered to be, A and B, the add-ons, are considered to be members of the original chabura. But they weren't there b'shas l'kicha. They weren't there when Reuven and Shimon bought their respective animals. It doesn't matter. Since it was clear that Reuven and Shimon were going to have to add on additional people, it's ki'ilu A and B are like the original members of the chabura. And therefore, again, when they do this whole swap over here, right? Reuven takes B, Shimon takes A, so A and B are in fact considered to be original members of the chabura, and therefore this solution could even work according to Rabbi Yehuda. Incredible. Amar Rashi says, Masnisin nami deka. Our Mishnah supports this reading as well. Diktoni v'chein chamish chaburos shel chamisha chamisha. But remember again, the Mishnah said what was true with Reuven and Shimon also works with 5 groups of 5 or 10 groups of 10. Now I make an interesting most. Remember again, what did that mean? What does it mean? What does it mean 5 groups of 5? Let's remember this case. 5 groups, their karbanos get mixed up. So we'll say, what do you do in order to allow everyone to eat a carbon Pesach? Remember what we do? We dissolve all of the groups. And reconstitute 5 new groups, each with a member of the original groups. That way, again, we'll say what ends up happening. Everybody takes an animal, and what are you guaranteed of? That at least one member of the original group is attached to his initial Karban Pesach. That's what you do. So the Gemara says, if we notice over here, the Gemara says, Shal chamisha in, aval shechamisha va'arba'a lo. I will say again, this solution, this idea only works with 5 groups of 5. Because if you have 5 groups of 5, you dissolve and reconstitute those groups. So we'll say, remember again, you had A, B, C, D, and E. And now you dissolve those groups, reconstitute them, and each group has a member from group A, B, C, D, and E. This way you ensure that there is at least one original member attached to each Karban Pesach. So the Gemara says, so therefore it only works with 5 groups of 5. But for example, if you were to have a mixture of groups of 5 and 4, this solution would not work. The Gemara says, Lav mishum delo payish chad b'mechabura gabe shmamina. Ultimately, again, we see why is that because halacha l'maisa, there is not an original member of the chabura to be attached to the current Pesach. Therefore, I will say, what begins just ultimately, so first of all, there's a number of takeaways from this. Number one, that there's machlokes Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi. So I want to point that out. Remember, again, so if we want to switch ownership of a Karban Pesach from one group to another, according to Rabbi Yehuda, you could do that. But there must be a member of the original Chabura who stays on. Rabbi Yossi says no. A Karban Pesach could have a fundamental, comprehensive change of ownership, but again, it can never remain for a moment ownerless, or can never remain ownerless for a moment. So the only way to swap ownership is how, essentially, have the new group or members of the new group join the old one, and then have the old one withdraw. We'll say the Rambam Paskins like Rabbi Yossi, that halacha lamaisa, you could switch ownership of a Karban Pesach. You do not need to retain any vestige of former membership, but the Karban cannot be ownerless at any point in time. And all the Gemara does says over here is that we originally thought that this solution espoused by the Mishnah would not work according to Rabbi Yehuda. Kamash Malan, it does. Hadron Allah, Misha Hayatame, Mazel Tov. We'll say, finishing the 9th parak of our Pesachim. So we'll say we now begin Daf Tzadik Kislois. Gavi, can you do me a favor? I think the fan is on the heating system. Just switch it to auto, please. So we'll say, so on Tzadik Tesla days at 99b, we have the incredible Zechos to begin. The last parak of Maseches Pesachim, to begin Arvei Pesachim. I will say again, I just want to point out, next 22 days in Yirtzeh Hashem, we will be zocha to learn this parak, and we will finish. I think we finished the week of Pesach, if I'm correct. I think that's when we finished Pesachim Yirtzeh Hashem. So we'll say, so incredible zechos. This is, I would venture to say that, thank you, that this is a parak that probably many of us have seen over the course of our schooling, of our yeshiva education. But it's an amazing thing that sometimes the same things that we saw when we were young, we come to them with a different appreciation as we get older, and especially coming into that, being able to come into the seder, now going through the sugyas and going through the halachas and the hashkafas. Sometimes we forget the schus that it is to learn Torah. We look at learning Torah as an obligation. Have to be kovei itim l'Torah. It's true, it is an obligation. But just because something is an obligation doesn't mean that it's not an ultimate privilege. So we'll say with that, let us begin. Arvei Pesachim Samach Minchas. We'll say, so I just want to point out from the beginning, you'll notice over here, one of the important features in the 10th parak over here in Arvei Pesachim is that we're going to begin to rely heavily on the Perush of the Rashbam. So you'll notice over here that the daf is split between Rashi on top and the Rashbam on the bottom. The Rashbam, you can see over here, was a Talmud, actually a grandson of Rashi, a Talmud and a grandson of Rashi. So the Rashbam's Perush on the parak is a bit more comprehensive than Rashi here. So we'll be referring to both, because sometimes, interestingly enough, there is a distinction. I will say the first distinction we see is how to read the first word of the parak. So if you notice again, Rashi's gear says Erev Pesachim, and the Rashbam's gear is Arvei Pesachim. Now I will say, again, even before we go on, you see which one makes more sense? Arvei, right? Because remember again, Pesachim is plural. So Arvei Pesachim makes more sense. So Tosas has a whole piece over here. Tosas says Erev Pesachim, Igar Sinan Arvei Necha. So if you have the gears of Arvei Pesachim like the Rashbam, that works well. The Igar Sinan Erev, but what about the fact that Rashi's gear says Erev? So Tosa says Hachi Kamar Erev Sheshochtin Bo Pesachim. Interesting. So Tosa says the way Rashi read this opening line was the evening on which we shecht Pesachim. Right? So again, so the evening on which, or really, we don't really shecht in the evening, but the evening in which we consume Pesachim. Kesatosa says, Inami, Erev Pesach Rishon B'Sheni. Okay, good. So we'll say, so again, we'll go with Arvei Pesachim of the Rashbam. So Arvei Pesachim, Erev Pesach Samoch LaMincha, when it is already close to Mincha time, Lo Yochal Adam Ad Shetechshach, a person should not eat until it gets dark. Let's take a look at the Rashbam. So Arvei Pesachim Samoch LaMincha, says the Rashbam, Mincha Ketanas. We'll say the Rashbam jumps in a little bit, because we're going to discuss in the Gemara which mincha you're talking about. Remember, I'm going to say, we're going to get to this, but remember, when we speak about mincha, we have two different minchas. We have mincha gidola, mincha ketana. Mincha gidola is at 6.5 hours into the day. Mincha ketana is at 9.5 hours into the day. So remember, again, if we go with the perfect halachic day, I'm sorry, 6 a.m. sunrise, 6 a.m. sunset, mincha gidola is 12:30, mincha ketana is 3:30. Samuch means some. So again, the Rashbam already points out over here that this is mincha ketana later on in the afternoon. So the samuch to mincha ketana. Read Rashbam. Mincha ketana kodem lemincha ma'at chatzi shah betchilas shah siris disnan tamin nishchat b'shmono mechza. Fine. So therefore, we'll say the Rashbam is already telling us first of all a couple of things. Number one, that the mincha we're talking about is mincha ketana, and number two, that samuch means half hour. So Rashbam defines this opening phrase in the Mishnah that a half hour before Mincha Kitana, which again, so just to illustrate, 3 p.m. on our perfect halachic day, 3 p.m., you can't eat. Rashi says, Lo yochal adam. Now, Bosai, look at the Rashbam again. Why can't you eat? Kedei sheyochal matzah shal mitzvah lete'avon mishum hidra mitzvah. So the Rashbam says you can't eat, the Mishnah says you can't eat, ultimately again, from a half hour before mincha ketana and on. Why? In order that you should eat matzah lete'avon with a good appetite, mishum hidra mitzvah. Because Rabbi say this is hidr mitzvah. Shabbos, I want to point out something very interesting, only because it's Sunday, so we have a few extra moments, that this is a very striking statement. First of all, from where do you know that eating matzah with an appetite is hidr mitzvah? Whereas we'll say, first of all, again, generally when we speak about hidr mitzvah, what's hidr mitzvah? Give me an example of hidr mitzvah. Esrog, right? Buying something more beautiful, right? Or again, going ahead and instead of taking, 7 tea lights, 8 tea lights and lighting them up, I get a nice menorah. Hidr mitzvah usually is the objective beautification of a chefza shal mitzvah. I don't just buy any pair of tefillin, I buy a nice pair of tefillin. That's what hidr is. The Rashbam is introducing this idea that suddenly eating matzah with greater appetite is a form of hidr mitzvah. So there's an incredible amount of literature about this. First of all, where does this is a brand, I just want to point out, this is a brand new definition of hidr. A brand new definition of hidr. Now, what I want to also point out is that something very interesting. Well, okay, so we're not going to get into all of this right now, but I just want to give you a mara makom that this notion. But I think perhaps there's an interesting approach here. Now, I will say one of the fascinating ideas by matzah is the duality of matzah. Right? What does matzah represent? And the answer is matzah represents two dramatically opposite things. When we start the Seder, matzah represents halach ma'anya diachalu avasana ba'ara di Mitzrayim. Matzah represents the bread of affliction. But yet, amazingly enough, when you get to the end of the Seder, what does matzah write? First of all, maybe in the end, we get to Rabbi Gamliel. Rabbi Gamliel, haya omer kol shlomer shol shdorim pesach lo yatzei chavasa, and matzah is hashumah. Matzah is hashumah. Right? Matzah is because we left Egypt with such haste. Hashemaru, I was saying, we left Egypt with such haste that the dough didn't have a chance to rise. So matzah is the bread of freedom. So matzah has this fascinating dialectic. Matzah is the bread of chirus, and matzah is the bread of freedom. So perhaps what the Rashbam is teaching us is as follows. When you first eat matzah at the Seder, matzah is consumed b'toras avdus. The hidr mitzvah to perform to eat the hidr mitzvah for matzah to commemorate slavery is to eat it how? When you're hungry. Why? Because ultimately, again, that's much more reminiscent of avdus. Because when a slave eats with incredible hunger. When a slave eats, he eats whatever, mostly we all know, when you eat that first kazayis of matzah at the Seder, unless you're one of those people who sneaks extra karpas, right? So again, you know who you are, right? So again, when you eat that kazayis of matzah, mamish, like, it's man. It's man, right? Especially if, if you're zocheh to have children at your Seder, and have the kids show up at the Seder with like that reinforced 15-ring loose leaf, right? And every single Devar Torah under the sun from the time of Moshe Rabbeinu until your Seder is there. And of course, you want to be a loving and supportive parent. Yes, please say one more Devar Torah about Manashtan. Or yes, we'd love to hear Manashtan in ancient Latin. Please, of course, that's what the Seder is all about. Hey, so when you get to that first kizayis of matzah, it's incredible. That first kizayis that we eat, that's the matzah of avdus. The hidr mitzvah of the consumption of matzah of avdus is l'te'avon. But contrast that to both say with what? The next time we eat matzah is when? Afikomen. How is afikomen supposed to be consumed? Al hasova. Interestingly enough, the matzah of afikomen is not consumed in a hungry, voracious fashion. The matzah of afikomen is consumed when you're full. Why? Because what does that matzah represent? That's the matzah of chirus. That's the matzah of freedom. So perhaps what the Rashbam is saying over here is, we don't eat from mincha ketana and on, because we want you to eat that first kezayis of matzah l'te'avon. That's hidr mitzvah. Hidr mitzvah of what? It's hidr mitzvah of the matzah of avdus. You eat the matzah of Avdus with an appetite. But yet conversely, by the time I get to the matzah of Cherus, which ultimately again is the matzah of Afikomen, that has to be eaten ala sova. That's consumed ultimately again on a full stomach, like a ben chorin whose appetite has been satisfied. So let's go back there. So says the Gemara. There's a lot more to talk about with matzah as well, this duality of matzah. But Emir Hashem, we'll see that as we get into the parak. So the Gemara says as follows: Afilu ani should be Yisrael yochel ad sheyasef. Even an ani, right? Even a pauper. So we're switching gears now. Even a pauper should not eat at the seder until he reclines. So even an ani has a mitzvah of heseba. Look at Rashi. Sorry, Rashbam. Achi Yosef kiderech b'nei chorin b'mita v'ala shulchan zeicha lecherus. Ultimately, again, even the ani. So we'll say this is an incredible yisod as well. Even the ani has to recline. Now remember, reclining is a physical demonstration of freedom. So even the ani, right, whose personal circumstances are compromised, still halacha l'maaseh has the mitzvah of heseba. Interestingly enough, so again, Tosas gets into this as well. Let's go back there. V'lo yifchasulo me'arba kosos shel yain. I just want to point out, like these Gemaras, it's literally like we hit the jackpot. It's literally like we just. Ed McMahon should come in with like the big publishers clearinghouse check. You know, that's how it feels like. So the Gemara says as follows: Allah Shalom. V'lo yifchasulo me'arba kosos shel yain v'afilu min hatamchoi. But we'll say ultimately again, and you should make sure that the ani is not left without 4 cups of wine. So we'll say, so now again, once we got into the topic of the ani has to do a seba, and everyone has to have dalit kosos. Everybody has to have the 4 cups of wine. We'll say, even if someone is so poor that they are supported from the tamchui, they still have to go ahead and have 4 cups. So let's analyze. We'll say, take a look at the Rashbam again. So we'll say, so this is very interesting. What does it mean? They should make sure that he is not without 4 cups. Who's the they? Who's the they? So this is incredible. The Rashbam says that there is an obligation upon the community to ensure that the poor have what they need for Pesach. So the Rashbam says they is a reference to the tzedakah collectors, the tzedakah gaboim. The tzedakah gaboim have to make sure that the ani has daled kosos. Kedisnan in pochsin la'ani over makom makom alma lishna de lo yifchesu agabay tzedakah koi. So we'll say, the Rashbam says, but this is very important, and this is such an incredible musar. You might think that because the Mishnah says, V'lo yifchesulo, they must make sure that he has dalet kosos. It's a din in the gabay tzedakah, it's a din in a tzedakah collect, din in the community. And maybe the ani has no chiyuv. Rashba says, no. It is a din in the community, but if halacha l'maisa, the Gabay Tzedakah didn't find the ani must find the Gabay Tzedakah. This is an incredible yisod. Never is there a model in Yiddishkeit where you are freed from personal responsibility. See, even if someone has an obligation to take care of me, I always have an obligation to take care of myself. Never, ever can I wash my hands of personalistic responsibility. So the community has an obligation to look out for the ani. Truth is, that's all the time. But specifically to make sure that he has dalet kosos, but the ani has a responsibility to look out for himself as well. So the Rashbam goes on, he says, Umatzinu b'reishas rabba, Rafuna b'shin Rabbi Abba, Amar kineged arba l'shonei geula, ha'amurin begalos mitzrayim ba'otzeisi v'ga'alti v'lakachti v'itzalti parshas erev. So I will say here, just a good Malcolm. See the opening Rashbam, Arvi Pesachim says, where do we get arba kosos from? Because the Mishnah, where did this come from? So the Rashbam says, the 4 cups of wine correspond to the 4 expressions of gula, 4 expressions of redemption, as we find in Parshas of the Eira. Beautiful. So we'll say, Vafilu min hatamchui. So remember again, now what does it mean, Vafilu min hatamchui? So one more Rashbam, Hu misparnes mitamchui shel tzedakah, dahainu ani sheba'aniyim. So we'll say, so just to point this out for just a moment, in a proper Jewish communal structure, and again, our communities aren't really structured in this way anymore, but at least Bizmana Gemara, or Bizmana Mishnah, you had different levels of communal assistance. So, just to skip all the way to our intended point over here, the Tamchui essentially was a soup kitchen. And the soup kitchen serviced those who were most desperate. So what the Mishnah is saying is, even if the ani in question is someone who is serviced by the tamchoy, by the soup kitchen. You still have to give him 4 cups of wine. Look at Rashbam. So misparas the tamchoy shal tzedakah dahinu anish shebaniyim. The Sam Sechas Peah mish yesh lamazon shtei sudos lo yutom in tamchoy afilu hachi im lo nasnu gabay yimkor lo sobos. So now listen to this. So there's a very important yesod that's coming out of here, which is even if the ani in question is the ani shebaniyim, the poorest of the brothers. Also remember again, if you had 2 meals worth of food in your home, you were ineligible for the soup kitchen. You couldn't get online for the soup kitchen. Smamish only if you had less than two meals. Well, sometimes we forget like how privileged we are. That you go into your home and Baruch Hashem, there's food. Sometimes we complain, especially when we're kids, that maybe it's not the food that we like, but what it means to go into a home that's stocked with food. We know, Rahman, there are people, even, of course, today who don't have that. In our community I'm talking about, certainly in the greater world. So there was a soup kitchen. A soup kitchen you could access if you did not have mazon shtei sudos. So what the Gemara is saying is like this, and this is incredible. What the Mishnah is saying is that even an ani who was essentially on the lowest rung of poverty, that the only way he was supported was from the tamchoy, from the collection plate, even he must be furnished with Daled Kosos. We'll say, what's the takeaway message? The takeaway message is that Daled Kosos are not reflective of what we'll call personal status chirus, but they're reflective of objective chirus. In other words, you see this theme over and over. Why does the Mishnah have to say that even the ani has to recline? Why does the Mishnah say that you have to give the ani money for 4 cups of wine? Because again, I might have thought that halacha l'maisa, it's only someone whose life is reflective of real cherus that should be involved in these things. The ani's going to reclaim like he's a free man. He's not a free man. He's in debt. Is this, is that. Ani's going to drink 4 cups of wine. So you begin to see what the Mishnah is highlighting to us is that ultimately, again, the reclining and 4 cups are demonstrative of some level of objective freedom that every person possesses independent of their personal circumstances. We're going to develop this theme more, but we'll say it's an incredible yesod. There is a level of freedom that I have that is fundamentally separate, distinct, and divorced from my personal circumstances. If you look at my circumstances, I might be impoverished, I might be in debt, I might have all these things, but I still recline, I still drink 4 cups, because the chirus that we demonstrate is part and parcel of the persona of every Jew. To be developed. Good. So we'll say that is our Mishnah. Oh, what a Mishnah. What a Mishnah. All right, good. Says the Gemara. Now it gets better. Says the Gemara, we'll say, so my area, Arvei Pesachim, Afilu Arvei Shabbosos V'yamim Tovim Nami. So we'll say, this is very interesting. So the Mishnah will say, by the way, there are more of these notebooks. If anyone wants Daf Yomi notebooks, and I would urge you, especially for Arvei Pesachim, find a way to write down the stuff that we're going to talk about. But, it doesn't have to be my stuff. But even if you see things that intrigue you along the journey, write it down. You could bring again your beautiful Daf Yomi Pesachim notebook to the Seder. Open it up, reference. So if for some reason people are not at Divrei Torah, you don't have to get to those awkward silent moments at the Seder where no one has anything to say. You could be the life of the party. And Emirat Hashem, if you're going to a hotel or, Dubai, I don't know where everybody's going this Pesach, you could go table to table. Table to table. You guys look a little bored. Let me share with you something. So I'll say the notebooks are here and there's plenty more of them as well. Says the Gemara, my area Arvei Pesachim. So I'll say this is interesting. So the Mishnah said that Arvei Pesachim Samoch L'Mincha, you can't go ahead and eat. You can't eat. So I'll say, so interesting, the Gemara, the Mishnah makes it sound like this is a din in Erev Pesach. So the Gemara says, I don't understand, why do you say Erev Pesach? Afilu Arvei Shabbos Yom Tov Nami. We'll say, in fact, this is a halacha on every Erev Shabbos and every Erev Yom Tiv. This sanya, Lo yochal adam ba'arei Shabbos yom tovim min amin chol l'mayla. A person really should not eat on Erev Shabbos or Erev Yom Tiv from mincha time and on. Why? Kedei sheikanes l'Shabbos kishutayva. Di Rabbi Yehuda. In order that a person should enter into Yom Tiv, a person should enter into Shabbos with a good appetite. With a good appetite. Rabbi Yossi says no. Olcha v'holich ad shetechshach. Rabbi Yossi says not true, but rather on Shabbos and Yom Tiv. you could eat until it gets dark. Whereas once it gets, I will say again, why do you eat until it gets dark? Because what happens once it gets dark? What, I'm sorry? Then there's a chiyuv kiddush. Right? Then there's a chiyuv kiddush. So remember again, Rabbi Yossi says you could continue to eating until it gets dark. That's fine. Obviously, once it gets dark, you have to make kiddush, and then you could continue eating afterwards. So we'll say this is very interesting. So the Gemara is saying, Mishnah, why do you make it sound like not eating from Samuch L'Mincha is a din in Erev Pesach? At least according to Rabbi Yehuda, it's a din. Sorry, it's a din. It's a din in every Erev Shabbos. It's a din in every Erev Yom Tiv. So what's the pshat? Says the Gemara. Amar Rav Huna. So we're going to have a couple of answers. Amar Rav Huna. Rav Huna says no. Lo tzricha el Rabbi Yossi the Amar Olech the Amar Ochel v'Holech ad shetechshach. So we'll say. So Rav Huna suggests. This is Rav Huna's approach. You're right. The Mishnah is not necessary according to Rabbi Yehuda, because according to Rabbi Yehuda, the din of stopping to eat from mincha from a half hour before mincha ketana and on is a din in every Erev Shabbos, din in every Yom Tov. The Mishnah is necessary according to Rabbi Yossi, because Rabbi Yossi normally holds that what? On a general Erev Shabbos or a general Erev Yom Tov, you can eat until when? Until nightfall. Oh, the Mishnah comes along, even according to Rabbi Yossi will agree that on Erev Pesach, you have to stop eating a half hour before mincha kitana. Why? The Gemara says, "Hani mili bar b'shos yom tovim, aval be'erev Pesach mishum chiyuv v'dematzah modeh." Even Rabbi Yossi will agree that on Erev Pesach you have to stop eating a half hour before mincha kitana. For what reason? Mishum chiyuva dematzah. So I will say, so once again, take a look at the Rashbam, Mishum chiyuva dematzah, shelo ne'achelas al hasova. So I will say, this is incredible. And I think this bolsters what we said before. Because here, Rabbi Yossi will hold, you can't eat matzah while in a state of being sated. That was too many words. While in a state of satiation. Good, Menachem? State of satiation? Satiety? Is that the right word? Satiety? Okay. While in a state of satiety. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I want my retainer back, by the way. Good. Satiation. V'chiyuva dematzah laila rishon lechova dichsir artolozo. So both sides, again, I just want to point out, I think this Rashbam bolsters what we said before. Remember again on both sides, the Rashbam doesn't say, like, I'm concerned it's going to be achila gasa. A person's going to be fressing the whole Erev Yom Tov. The baich is going to be busting, and then he's going to eat matzah, and it's achila gasa. See, if you notice again, what the Rashbam is concerned about over here is that the matzah will be ne'achal al hasova, that I won't be hungry, which is fascinating because afikoman is dafka supposed to be consumed al hasova. So you begin to see from here that the first time I eat matzah, there's a din of eating it while hungry. That's what the Rashbam called before hidur mitzvah. What kind of hidur mitzvah is that? Elamai, if you say like what we said before, that the first din of matzah is zecher la'avdos, and therefore the hidur mitzvah, the way to feel the avdos, is to eat it when you're hungry. Now I understand. I don't want you to eat the matzah when you're full. I dafka want you to eat the matzah when you're hungry. That's the hidur mitzvah for the matzah of avdos. So we'll say, therefore again, Rav Huna says, therefore, you're right. According to Rabbi Yehuda, this din that you shouldn't eat from mincha kitana and on applies every Erev Shabbos and every Erev Yom Tiv. The chiddush of the Mishnah is according to Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi is one who allows you to eat up until nightfall, Erev Shabbos, Erev Yom Tov, but even Rabbi Yossi will agree that halacha l'maaseh Erev Pesach, you must stop a half hour before mincha. And I just want to point out, there's going to be a whole extensive discussion about what mincha we're talking about. The Rashbam kind of ruined it for us, although he made it a lot easier for us. We know we're talking about mincha kitana. Right? So we're talking about, again, 9.5 hours into the day, and samuch means a half hour before that. So therefore, again, in our day, from 9 hours and on, from 3 o'clock and on, even Rabbi Yossi will agree that at Erev Pesach he can't eat. Beautiful. Rav Papa Bosek comes along and says no. Rav Papa Amar, Afilu Teimar Rabbi Yehuda. No, not true. It could very well be that even according to Rabbi Yehuda, the Mishnah is that side. Now remember again, Rabbi Yehuda is the opinion who holds that what? Every Erev Shabbos and every Erev Yom Tov, in general, we don't eat from a half hour before Mincha Kitana and on. So if that's the case, according to Rabbi Yehuda, why is the Mishnah's statement necessary? Now, I say, remember again, according to Rabbi Yehuda, had the Mishnah not said anything, I would have assumed that of course you can't eat from 9 hours of the day and on. So Rabbi Papa says, no, even according to Rabbi Yehuda, it's necessary. Why? I feel to Rabbi Yehuda. Hasam ba'arvi Shabbos yomim tovim mina mincha ula mala da'aser samach lemincha shari aval be'erev ha'pesach afilu samach lemincha nami aser. Wow, very interesting. So Rav Papa says, here's the difference. According to Rabbi Yehuda, on a stam erev Shabbos or a stam erev Yom Tiv, now I know you're going to correct me. There's no such thing as a stam erev Shabbos or a stam erev Yom Tiv. Every erev Shabbos is Kodesh Kadoshim, but okay, you know what I mean. On a regular erev Shabbos, regular erev Yom Tiv, what's the din? You have to stop from mincha time and on. What Rav Papa is suggesting is that according to Rabbi Yehuda, erev Pesach is different. Why is erev Pesach different? How is erev Pesach different? What do you have? An extra half hour. An extra half hour. That whereas, again, every other Erev Shabbos and Erev Yom Tiv, you have to stop at Mincha Kitano. We'll call it at 3:30. At 3:30, you have to stop eating. Erev Pesach, 3 o'clock. 3 o'clock. Good. Shabbos, and again, so I just want to point out, according to Rav Huna, the Mishnah is only necessary for the sheet of Rabbi Yossi, who holds that you can normally eat until nightfall, Erev Pesach, Erev Yom Tov, Erev Shabbos. Erev Pesach is going to be different. Rav Papa comes along and he says, no, the Mishnah is necessary even according to Rabbi Yehuda, because Halacha L'Maisa, Rabbi Yehuda normally allows you to eat up until Mincha. But Erev Pesach, it's only Samach L'Mincha. You have to stop eating a half hour earlier. So the Gemara says, Erev Shabbos Samach L'Mincha Shari. Is that true? That according to Rabbi Yehuda, you're allowed to eat all the way up until Mincha time on a regular Erev Shabbos. You don't have to stop Samach. V'asanya, we learned, Lo yochal adin ba'arvi Shabbos yamim tovim mitesha shaus ulamalo. We learned in a brayso, a person should not eat on Erev Shabbos and Erev Yom Tiv from 9 hours of the day on Erev. So now, what's 9 hours of the day? What is that? What is that? That's samach. That's just another way of saying. That's just we'll say, as opposed to our Mishnah, which just condensed it by just saying samach. This price is spelling it out. 9 hours of the day on. That is a half hour before Mincha Kitana. That's samach. Kedei sheikanes l'Shabbos kishutayva. Did Rabbi Yehuda, in order that you enter into Shabbos with a good appetite. Rabbi Yossi Omer Ocha v'holech ad shetachshach. And Rabbi Yossi says, no, you can go out and you could eat up until nightfall. So we'll say, here you see pretty explicitly that what? That Rabbi Yehuda is saying, even on a Stam Erev Shabbos, Stam Erev Yom Tiv, you have to stop eating when? 9 hours. 9 hours is Samuch L'Mincha. So we'll say it's a kasha on Rav Papa. So Rav Papa, again, remember one more time. Rav Papa wanted to say Rabbi Yehuda on a regular Erev Shabbos, regular Erev Yom Tiv says you could eat up until Mincha. And the Chiddush of the Mishnah is that on Erev Pesach you have to stop a half hour earlier. But now I have another Brisa, and the Brisa has Rabbi Yehuda on record saying that even on a Stam Erev Shabbos, Stam Erev Yom Tiv, you could eat, you have to stop at 9 hours, Samuch, which indicates to us that a regular Erev Shabbos, regular Erev Yom Tov is no different than Erev Pesach. In which the case, what's the need for the Mishnah? To which the Gemara says, Amar Zutra. So we'll say, now watch this. So the Gemara says, this is good. Amar Zutra, we'll say, last line, Talik Tesla, base Amar Zutra, Man Leimalad Demitaratzti. This is great. We'll say, who says that the Brisa is correct? Or as well say, we just quoted a Brisa that quoted the Shita of Rabbi Yehuda as saying, unless you want to walk around, it might be alright. So if you want to get you a bigger cup. So who says that the Brisa that we just quoted is correct? Right? We're just quoting the Brisa that says that Rabbi Yehuda holds even on a Stam Erev Shabbos and a Stam Erev Yom Tov, you have to stop eating at 9 hours. Just like Erev Pesach. Who says that's correct? Right? The top of Kuf, maybe ultimately again it's incorrect. Right? Maybe the Brisa should have read that on a regular Erev Shabbos and a regular Erev Yom Tov, you could eat until 9.5 hours into the day. And therefore the Chiddush of our Mishnah is that according to Rabbi Yehuda, on Erev Pesach, you have to stop eating at 9 hours. So who's that? Which by the way is such an incredible yisod. This by the way, I think this line in the Gemara, it is so incredibly important, especially for the times of the Rebbe said today, everyone and their mother has a blog, right? And people think that what you see in print is automatically correct. And the truth is, people engage in so much, verbal vomit, right? So they just say whatever they want, and they just write whatever they want. And because it lives, in the, whatever, in the internet, or because it lives, because it has an address, people assume that it's correct. And it's so incredibly important. Look, Rebbe, I just want to point out, if the Gemara could say that maybe the Brisa is wrong? Who says this just because you wrote it like this? Who says it's correct? Alachas kama v'kama. How careful we have to be with the information we ingest as well. And in general, where do you get MS from? Well, said this is because, it's incredible. Everybody has their shitas, and everybody has their ashkafas, and everybody has their isms, and everybody has their outlooks. You have to be very careful where you get your MS from. Where you get your MS from? What is the source of your MS? Just when the Gemara could say, Dilma mishtabesh tehi. Maybe they're... How careful we have to be. Okay, Amrli Mareimar Vitim Rabbi Yemar says top of Kuf. Just going to do another few lines. Amrli Mareimar Vitim Rabbi Yemar Anu Yiklei Pirkei Rav Pinchas. So listen to this. Mareimar, I'll just say it was Rav Yemar said, I went to the shiva of Pinchas Breid Rav Ami. The Kam Tana, the Tani Kameh, the Kibla Mineh, and in fact the Tana got up. And he in fact went ahead and he in fact taught it this way. He taught it this way, and ultimately again Rav Pinchas accepted it. Says Rabbi Osai, it would appear that halacha l'maisa, the brisa, as it was just taught over here, is in fact correct. Which means that ultimately again Rabbi Yehuda holds that halacha l'maisa, both on Erev Shabbos, Erev Yom Tov, as well as Erev Pesach, you stop eating from 9 hours and on. Therefore again Rabbi Osai leads the Gemara to the conclusion, Ella Mechabarta kid Rav Huna. Rather, Rabbi said, the Gemara says, you're right. Rather, let's go back to Rav Huna's interpretation. Rabbi say, what was Rav Huna's interpretation? Rav Huna says, in fact, the Mishnah is not necessary according to Rabbi Yehuda. Why not? Why not, Rabbi say? Because Rabbi Yehuda holds in general on every Erev Shabbos and every Erev Yom Tov. When do you stop eating? When do you stop eating? Samuch l'mincha, 9 hours. So the brayso that the Gemara quoted on the bottom was in fact authoritative. It was correct because it was taught in the share of Rav Pinchas, and Rav Pinchas accepted it. So we'll say, so therefore again, Rabbi, you're right. The Mishnah does not serve a purpose according to Rabbi Yehuda, because according to Rabbi Yehuda, he holds in general every Erev Shabbos, every Erev Yom Tov, you stop eating a half hour before mincha. Now, in a general Erev Shabbos and Erev Yom Tov, why do you stop eating? Why? So that you should enjoy the Suda when you're hungry. That's the din. That the Yom Tov Suda, the Shabbos Suda is more enjoyable if you go in hungry. Now again, Rabbi Yehuda would agree that the reason you stop eating before Pesach is because of matzah, right? It's a little bit of a different reason, but it's the same yisod. So therefore, the Gemara says, Rav Huna's approach makes more sense. That Rav Huna says, even according to Rabbi Yossi, who holds that halacha l'maisa, on a regular Shabbos, or on a regular Yom Tov, on a regular Erev Shabbos, regular Yom Tov, you can eat until when? Until nightfall. Even Rabbi Yossi will agree that halacha l'maisa on Erev Pesach you must stop eating a half hour before mincha kitana. And Rabbi say that is indeed how we paskin halacha l'maisa. Again, we'll see the halacha l'maisa in all of this, both on Erev Pesach and Erev Shabbos. But now it becomes clear that everyone agrees with the ruling of the Mishnah, namely that on Erev Pesach we stop eating a half hour before mincha kitana. And the chiddush is even Rabbi Yossi, who normally allows you to eat on Erev Shabbos and Erev Yom Tov at Shetech will agree that halacha l'maisa Erev Pesach you stop a half hour before mincha. All right, so we'll stop over here for today. We'll continue with these sugyas tomorrow. Shkoyach.